morning, everybody, and welcome to this leadership episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club. My name is Armand Farouk, and I'm here with my co-host, Mark Cusklow. And today, for a round two, we have Jonah Mandel. He is the VP of Sales over at Guesty. If you aren't familiar with Jonah, one of his first episodes was one of our first leadership episodes. It was one of our best ones. He runs an org of 60 reps and managers, and so he's had to build a really systematic process for hiring, onboarding, certifying, but also just like keeping in touch with his entire sales organization. So, Mark, why should people listen?
Yeah, I think this is one of the best interviews we've done in a long time, Armand. I just think that Jonah is buttoned up. And when somebody's buttoned up, you know what it says to me? They're telling us stuff they actually do, not stuff that they think about doing or wish that they did. And like, to me, that's when you really learn, is when you're learning from somebody that actually does what they're talking about.
In a 3, 2, 1, let's roll. Alrighty, Jonah, welcome back to the show. We start every show with your top 3 actionable takeaways. Let's get your 3.
Action item number 1, onboarding. Win the first 30 days or lose the next 300. What I mean by that is setting that crucial first impression is super, super important. This is where you set the foundation of what good looks like at your organization. So use the honeymoon phase, the first 330 days, to make sure you're building good habits. And the key here is don't assume knowledge transfer, especially when you're onboarding in a remote environment. Very, very easy for people to sit there and smile and nod and say that they're actually absorbing the information. You cannot skip that very, very crucial step to certify, test. Everyone hated pop quizzes when they were in middle school and high school, but I can assure you, in a remote environment, it's so easy for your new hires to smile and nod and absorb absolutely nothing. So highly, highly recommend. I know a lot of us don't love being super academic. Layering in those certifications, those tests, and making sure people are actually absorbing the information.
I promise you I'm not smiling, nodding, and absorbing nothing. What's number 2?
Driving ruthless focus across your organization. I really love the less is more mindset in life. I think clutter, all sorts of dashboards, all sorts of tools, different interfaces for salespeople to interact out of day to day, all it does is create confusion. So a few things that I really try to implement throughout my management team and our broader organization: less is more. And an example of this is idiot proof your dashboards. And what do I mean by that is your dashboards should tell a story. If somebody from marketing clicks into your sales leadership dashboard, or your CEO or chief people officer, they should be able to read that dashboard like a book and very clearly understand what every report actually means. So take pride in your titles, your subtitles. Try not to use acronyms. And I'll give you a very clear example. I'm working with our head of SDR, and we have these dashboards that show different cohort metrics. One of which that we're very, very focused on is improving our MQL to op conversion. If you're a marketing leader and you click into that dashboard and you look at this week's conversion rate, that conversion rate is obviously going to be lower than the previous week and the week prior to that. In your subtitle, put the reason why. Every cohort of inbound lead goes through a sales loft cadence that on average takes 21 days. So the most recent cohort is going to have a lower conversion rate than the prior week and the week before that. So that's just an example of making sure that your titles and subtitles tell a very clear story. And the last one on dashboards, I like to think about it again like a book. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and an end. I will start with top of funnel metrics, get into mid funnel, and then speak to close one and revenue metrics. Let people read through the entire story when they're actually going through these dashboards.
I know Mark loves it when people misread dashboards, so we're going to come back to that. But first, what's number 3?
Being the body language doctor. And what do I mean by that? So stay hyper attuned to the emotional state of your team. As a revenue leader, as a CRO, VP of sales, whatever your title may be, a huge part of your job is making sure that you are encouraging, you are staying close to the people on your team and helping them feel part of the broader organization. So a small kind of tip or Slack trick that I like to use is I have 4 or 5 different parts of our team that roll up to me in my current role at Guesty: the SDR team, the BDR team, the AE team, our field sales team. I create sections in Slack for every team. And I actually have it organized so the people that show up at the top are the folks on the team that I haven't spoken to in the longest period of time. So maybe Jill on the SDR team, I haven't checked in on how Jill is doing in 6 weeks. Her name will show up at the top of that SDR team Slack group. And as a leader, I try to check in every 6 weeks saying, hey, Jill, how are you doing? I know you got a dog, 5 weeks ago. How is that going? I'm sure balancing being a pet owner and an SDR is no easy task. Just checking in with your people and making sure that you're actually reading the body language of your team. And what's not said matters just as much as what is said. So when my managers are running team meetings, we record all of our team meetings at 1.5 speed. I always go back and I'll watch those meetings, and I'm keeping a close eye on who's chiming in and who's not chiming in, whose camera's on, whose camera's off. And if I notice that, hey, a gentleman named, Visar who works for me in London, he's been pinging me or his manager, always chiming in team meetings. In the last 3 weeks, he's been really quiet. I will make a mental note to make sure that I'm checking in with him, seeing how he's doing personally, professionally, and making sure that things are going well on his side.
I think this is such an underrated part of leadership, Jonah, is, you manage the person, you don't manage the business. When you manage the business, then the person doesn't know how to make the business work, right? When you're like the body language doctor, give me a couple other examples of things that you're looking for that show that someone is off, that they might need a little lean in or a little hug.
Yeah, a couple of good examples that kind of pop into my head. In every sales environment, there's always that kind of healthy friction between maybe an SDR and an AE or an AE and a CSM. And if I notice that, a lot of our back and forth between those departments are in public channels, that maybe Johnny is a little hostile or a little bit short with his post-sale team member, or a little aggressive with the SDR and yelling or screaming about their qualification process. That's one example of maybe I would pull Johnny aside and say, hey, Johnny, one, get to know kind of what's going on with him. Is it something outside of work, with work? Also try to reset expectations and say, hey, Johnny, when you're working with an SDR or the post-sale team member, you always need to think about the end result. If these teams are going to want to work with you, you have to be friendly and work with them in a professional manner. So, Mark, to answer your question, I'm looking at how they're treating others in the organization. I'm looking at how engaged they are in team meetings. Those are really the primary indicators of engagement on my end.
I don't know why I started doing this, but at some point early on at Outreach, any deal over $10,000, I would personally Slack the rep. Hey, way to go, blah, blah, blah. A couple things. Hey, maybe the manager told me about the deal or some things they'd overcome. By the end, when we were doing $28 million a quarter, that was a lot of deals. That was a lot of slacking. Yeah. But if I missed a Slack on a 10K deal, that rep within an hour would Slack me. Where's my congratulations? Where's my Slack? And when I wouldn't get that, that was a sign to me that they didn't feel connected to me. They didn't feel supported by me. I love this, like rearrange your Slack so that you can see who you haven't talked to and how long does it take them to get back to you? What is a tenor like? I can't tell you. I think these little kind of what's your heartbeat like is really, really important for a sales leader to have a couple systems in place that they're measuring that with.
Jonah, could you give an example of like a story of how someone reacted when you checked in on them, or maybe something that you learned that you wouldn't have learned if you hadn't checked in on them?
In my current role at Guesty, I took over the SDR organization probably 7 or 8 months ago. I had just joined a team meeting, hadn't necessarily connected with the individuals one-on-one. And one of our SDRs, we actually asked her to tack on a couple extra hours because we were short-staffed. She was working, 11-hour days. And I reached out to her at the end of the week and I said, hey, SDR X, really appreciate your hard work and everything you're doing. And that actually led us into a conversation about some of the personal challenges that she's running into outside of work, how much she appreciated the extra work because it actually allowed for a distraction from some of the family trouble that she was running into. So I think that just checking in on people, it actually opens the door to personal conversations that build a much tighter bond to you and that person to the company.
This is a muscle that I have to train because like a lot of times, like I forget to just check in on folks when things are wrong. And so this gal who's like one of the best reps I've ever coached, we were in our Monday morning meeting and she was reading through her numbers and we talked through like a couple things she might be able to work on. And she just takes like a little bit of a deep breath. She's like, okay. And she like writes it down and like didn't give any pushback or anything like that. And so I texted her afterwards and I was like, hey, what's going on? And we jump on a call and she goes in a super long thing around like how she really, really misses connecting with coworkers in person and she's feeling a little bit detached from work. And we get in a 30-minute conversation. Afterwards, she sends me like the nicest text in the world saying like it just means a lot to have someone who actually checks in on me like a human being. And so just by doing that, like even if nothing is wrong, the fact that they know that it's not just their numbers that exist in your purview, it's their emotional state that exists in your purview as a VP of sales or CRO. Oftentimes they think they're not even on your radar, let alone their numbers. But if you can make sure that the humans on your radar, like that's how you actually get people to stick around.
Totally. I just read this book I highly recommend to everyone called Culture Code. And they have a chapter on the San Antonio Spurs and Greg Popovich and how were the Spurs so successful for so many years. A reporter that actually covered the team, he sat there on the sidelines and something that he noticed was they were always slapping hands, they were always engaged, they were always hugging. And again, I'm a big believer that if the culture is there, that if people feel connected to the people in the organization, the work output is substantially higher than if people feel like they're obviously, numbers on a spreadsheet.
Going back to like your first takeaway, a lot of those relationships are formed with strong onboarding, right? Like we spend all this time interviewing. Now we're bringing a rep on. It's time to get them acclimated to the job so they can be a great person, but we need to get them great at the job that we just hired them to do. And one thing you talked about there was like, don't just assume people absorb information, right? And we know, I think, what is the number? You have to hear something 21 times before, that's why advertising works, whatever the stat is. But you talked about certifications. I don't know if I ever figured out certifications. I'd love to know, like, if we dig into that, what are the top 2 or 3 certifications that you do? And how do you make sure they're not just like check the box little stupid things that 99% of people could get right within 5 minutes if they just looked at it?
These two may come off as interesting because I do think they're pretty unique to what we're doing in my current role at Guesty. But one that maybe is not as unique is product knowledge. The product that we actually sell is fairly complex, a lot of different add-ons. So what we do on the certification side is we actually create various sections to the certification for product knowledge. And we have some of our product experts, domain experts. So we sell a core product that's like a unified inbox for property managers. We have an accounting module, and then we also have an insurance product. So I work very closely with the product domain experts. We actually create a 10-part quiz that the team needs to actually go through. We are scoring them on their competency on each of these specific verticals. So this is actually like a test that people need to fill in and pass. Part of that is written, where they're actually answering questions. The other part of that is live mock pitches that they're doing with leadership to actually make it conversational. So we will give them information on a certain prospect. They need to research that prospect. Me as the leader of the team, I am the decision maker at that company, and we are going through each level of the product, and they need to show that they can actually demo it in a live demo environment. So there's part written, part verbal that's done via mock pitch and live demonstration to make sure the academic side is done, that they can actually regurgitate that to a prospect. So I think that's really important. It's the academic side and being able to show that they can regurgitate that to a prospect live.
We got to a point at Outreach where we had so much stuff to teach to so many different people and so many different maturation points of their role. We had the Brian Gerards of the world who were there with me on day one and like knew everything about the product, maybe even more than the engineers did. And then we had the new hire that started 2 days ago that couldn't tell you what the send button was, right? We developed this thing when we launched training. We defined ahead of time, was this training to create awareness, competency, or mastery? Yep. And awareness was, you've checked the box in the LMS and you've done the quiz. Competence was, you've role played this with someone in the organization with a rubric and they have scored you as passing on that rubric. And then the mastery was, you have submitted a live call with an actual prospect or buyer where you have aced the rubric too. So it was learn it and show she learned it, demonstrate it internally or demonstrate it externally. Once we got that thing going, it really transformed how we were able to make sure that we were setting the right expectations with the company of like, this is how far we're taking it with this training. You're going to get on the call and only hear, 50% of what you expect because that's what we can invest in right now versus 80%, right? And I think that this level of certification stuff is really, really important because you're right. Like, it's always talk to reps all the time, and I'd be like, you have to own your own development. It's like if you had your best teacher in high school and you just sat in their class and did emails while they were teaching, you wouldn't have gotten a good grade. But if you did the homework, you did the study group, you took some notes, you got a great grade because they're a great teacher. And most enablement people are decent teachers, but people are doing email while they're teaching and doing nothing else with it and then saying, I'm not getting trained.
I like that last point that you made a lot. And Armin, it reminds me a lot about something you preach quite a bit at 30 Minutes to President's Club, the 80-20 rule, where I think a lot of people go south is they put this training schedule together and every week it's a new topic, but actually absorbing the information is so, so important. And I always go back to golf. When I was taking golf lessons, the instructor would be like, turn your shoulders, turn your hips, keep your eye on the ball, trying to teach me 3 things at once. And then at the end of the lesson, I didn't absorb anything. And the next week, we're going through the same thing over and over and over again. So that last point that you made, where it's like, okay, you may have passed the certification, you may have done a good mock pitch, but within the next 10 days, you've got to share with leadership and your peers an actual call where you were nervous and talking to a live prospect and how you actually demonstrated that you absorbed it, you practiced it, and you put it into the real world. We're not doing that today. I think that is a great takeaway that we need to implement. And then they can actually share that in a public channel. Other people can listen to it. And then it cascades from there.
Jonah, I've got a couple of questions on implementing this too. You have this certification, and I've seen a lot of certifications in other orgs where it's like, could you use the right crayon to color in the line level certification, right? And I remember if I was doing some of these things, if I had all my reps do the mock discos, the mock demos, and I was really testing them, there are a couple times where I saw these mistakes happen on real customer calls, and I'm like, shoot, I should have caught that internally.
Yep.
So could you give an example or like a story or a time that you remember when you saw something in a rep certification when you were like, okay, this person's not quite ready yet? And I'm curious, like, what did you see? What were you looking for in that moment that
Yeah.
led you to believe they weren't ready?
So as salespeople, I think we're really good at talking around tough questions. One of the hardest things to sell in our current role, in my current role at Guesty, is our accounting module. Every property management company needs some custom work. So through our mock certification process, it was very, very clear when folks were reading off of scripts or were spending maybe 30 seconds on a tough topic and then immediately transitioning and asking the prospect a different question to deflect and go into the next topic. So 2 things that we would look for. One was during the certification process, how much time did you actually spend on the tough topics? Because a lot of our good sellers would roll past those very quickly and get into the next question and be able to kind of skirt their way around it. That was definitely a big one. How much time did they spend on it? And then we had to iterate our certification process and actually dig deep into, specific modules, how they actually work. Because a lot of these folks surface level would be able to answer the questions in a professional manner. But when we got into the nitty gritty, they weren't able to dig deep into the product. So I would say looking at the amount of time sellers spend on the more challenging aspects of the sale during the certification process and making sure I'm the role play, I'm the prospect, asking those customized questions that prospects are going to ask that will kind of make the salesperson trip. I would rather them trip up during the certification process rather than live on a call with a prospect.
Yeah, I was always thinking about there were like 3 levels to selling. And level 1, if you just use a discovery call as an example, you've got beginning, middle, end. Could you set an agenda? Did you find one problem? Could you set next steps? And it wasn't always going to be very pretty the way they did it. But if you could at least do those 3 things and like get to a problem, I was like, that's step 1. That's usually like SMB level, my expectation. Level 2 is like, were you able to do it with like a little bit of style? Like, were you able to read the body language and like insert a story at the right time in a way that it didn't feel awkward? Were you able to like lay off on the questions when it made sense to lay off and you got the sense that they were like getting a little bit cagey? And that's level 2. That's like mid-market selling. And then once you get into like enterprise or like really, really high quality, high caliber sellers, that's when it's like, can you actually change a prospect's perspective? Or like come off as a peer-to-peer advisor? Or if they diagnose the problem the wrong way, can you challenge their diagnosis? And usually what I'm looking for is like, can you get that level 1 stuff? And then just like show me that you at least gave a shot at the level 2 stuff. Like, can you get the parts and at least show like a touch of finesse that shows me that you're going to get it at some point eventually?
I think the easiest place to find this is in discovery. You have people that they're going through the onboarding and certification process. They have the questions that they know they need to answer. And then the prospect feels like it's an interrogation. So that level 2 is how do you make sure you're getting your qualifying questions out during discovery, but it doesn't feel like an interrogation. And I feel like so many folks, especially during onboarding and certification, they have their list of 5 questions. And it's like, Armin, how many listings do you have? Where are you located? And it's an interrogation. It's not a sales process. That's the area where it stands out the most to me during onboarding is can you do the little finesse? Can you add some rapport building skills into the mix?
And how do you decide? I think this is like the biggest question of onboarding to me is when do they get live deals? So they've gone through this certification process. When does Jonah Mandel give a rep live deals?
Giving reps live deals. They need to obviously pass their certification. They need to go through the mock pitches. On the mock pitch side, the way we do it today is they have to pass the mock pitch with a peer, with a manager, and with a VP. And that last step, the VP mock pitch, is typically when we allow them to go live. So we now have 3 use cases, 3 examples of 3 different internal members that have said, okay, Johnny or Jill, they're ready to be released out into the wild and actually start talking to live leads. The other part that we do is listen, nobody wants to burn leads, but not every lead is created equally. I will send live leads to new hires that have very, very low revenue potential. So if they actually burn that lead, I don't want to say I don't care, but it's not going to have that detrimental of an impact on the actual business. At Guesty, we sell to property managers. Some might have 1 listing, some might have 1,000. Someone that has 1 listing, it's not going to make or break our business if the salesperson doesn't convert at the typical 35 or 40% conversion. So we actually start sending them leads that have very low revenue potential to allow them to start testing out their skills. And we have different queues for our inbound side, within Chili Piper, and they have to pass the SMB, they've got to pass the mid-market, and then they get added to more and more queues as they show that their certification and their process is where it needs to be.
Yeah, we used to have a sub-segment called micro, which was under 35 employees. And you know what? Every once in a while, you could get a nice 20K deal out of that, which was crazy. The average deal size was about 7K. And we would make reps do 20 micro deals, like 20 micro conversations or like the deal cycles. And it was crazy. Not only did they get the at-bats and the practice with real life people, a lot of them started winning business. And a couple of them would start to have like 1 call closes, and that's when like the momentum started to hit. Like, all right, put me in, coach. Like I'm ready. I got some stuff I can work on. Like, yeah, I screwed a couple up, but like I'm ready to go. I love that. Hey, we got separate queues. You earn your way from queue to queue to queue until you get in all the queues. That's a dope idea.
I think the other part that you said there is creating a winning culture. When you're a new hire and it takes you 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks to get your first close, I don't care how confident you are, you're immediately in your own head. So helping that person get their first win under their belt, and everyone's like, oh my God, how did Mark close a deal in his 3rd week? Sending them those smaller deals where 1 call closes are actually possible. It's not just helping them refine their skills, but it's also helping them get that first win under their belt. We've all been in roles where it's taking us a little bit longer to get that first win. Then we're in our own head. We question, why are we here? Can we perform well? And it's all downhill from there. So I like that. I think it kills 2 birds with 1 stone.
Honestly, I feel like the reason that I'm still in sales is because when I started as a mid-market AE at Carta, they put you 1 month on the SMB round robin, and Carta sells to startups. So I'm meeting with like 10 startups a day.
Yeah.
And it's just like a ticket machine, like 2K specials nonstop. And eventually you close 22K specials, and then you get a 10K deal coming your way. You're like, I feel like the man. It's like if I'm in jujitsu, I'm a brown belt, and they throw me against my like 20 white belts. I'm going to go against the black belt thinking that I'm going to like conquer the gorilla and kick this guy's ass because I'm coming in with a head full of steam. And so a lot of onboarding is like hacking the psychological side and like giving your reps that beginner's confidence so they're not in their own head and they think that every single deal is like the end of the world for them. Jonah, I've got one other question, just like putting this to life. You run an org of how many reps? Again, how many reps, how many managers?
Sales org total is about 60.
Okay, cool. So my guess is you're not demo certing all 60 reps. If you could walk me through like how many certs are you doing, and then who are you having do those certs so that you can give yourself some leverage in the org, that would be helpful for a lot of managers who want to like put this into action themselves.
Yeah. So every part of the organization does certifications and like a very quick kind of high level on the org structure. SDR team, BDR team, global AE team, field sales team. The different skill sets required for the roles are very, very different. Our AE team is a little bit more transactional. They're running 3 or 4 demos a day. Their certifications are way, way heavier on the actual traditional SaaS demo experience. Those folks are doing 3 different certifications: needs analysis, product, and then we also have one on competitors. We're in a very competitive space. So making sure that you're able to not just run someone through a battle card, but truly show them within the product, we're the Ferrari of the industry, we're the most expensive, how you can value-based sell and show them the difference. So those are the 3 on the AE side. On our field sales side, it's way more on opportunity creation. They're knocking on doors, they're holding local events. I don't know if I would necessarily bucket this under a certification, but they will produce pipeline generation plans that they will walk me and their manager through. I'll give you an example. We may hire a market manager that is in the Panhandle in Florida. That person has to submit a pipeline plan that will actually show us, taking into account seasonality, what parts of their territory they want to hit during certain months, who are the key players in their territory, how do they plan on getting their foot in the door. So with field sales, their certification process is way heavier on pipeline generation and making sure they're actually mapping their territory. And that differs from an AE where they're sitting behind a computer and they're doing demo after demo after demo. On the SDR, BDR side, our BDR team is 100% outbound. And the reason why we have those two separated, we have pretty high volume of inbound leads. SDR is just field inbound. BDR is just outbound. That certification process is way, way more geared towards the cold calling component. We actually just signed up for 30 minutes for President's Club to help our BDR organization practice their cold calling ability. Those certifications are: how do you open the door? How do you immediately grab attention? And how do you handle that pricing objection? Because immediately when people hear Guesty, they think premium, they also think expensive. And how do we make sure that the BDR team is certified and can handle those objections in real time? So those are the different parts of the org and how the certification process differs from AE, field sales team member, and BDR.
Amazing show. And also, thank you for being a customer and buying some of our cold calling. You know what? In the show notes, there's a discount code. It's Jonah. Use code Jonah for $50 off. All right. I'm serious. Everyone, go check out the cold calling course, discovery course. But dude, we have to move on to the final question. We talked about a lot of good habits when it comes to onboarding, hiring, culture. But what is one bad habit that every leader needs to break so that all teams get a little bit better?
I would say hiring for culture fit. You hear that all the time. And culture fit to a lot of people means hiring someone that may share the same hobbies or someone you might want to have a coffee or beer with. When I say hiring for culture fit, I believe that this person needs to be able to operate at the velocity and the stage of business. The amount of times in my career I've made the mistake of hiring because someone has a fancy logo on their resume and they are the completely wrong fit for where we are as a business. So when I think culture fit, they need to be able to operate at the speed that you require as an organization and as a leader. I know that I run hot and I need people that are internally motivated. I can't coach motivation. I have geared my interviewing much more towards culture fit, making sure people are internally motivated, not being blinded by fancy logos. And then the last part is I think this is part interview, part culture fit. Have they sold a premium product? If you're selling a premium product, you have to make sure these people are value-based sellers.
Dude, thank you for coming back, man. Killer show. Everyone, hang on for a 60-second recap coming up soon. Alrighty, Mark, it's time for a 2x2 recap from this episode with Jonah Mandel. What do you have for your 2?
Number one, I don't think it can be overstated. People absorb way less information than you think. And the only way, even though it's our profession, even though we should be professionals, the only way to make sure somebody is actually internalizing what you're teaching is to have certifications in a real process. If you just expect to teach it and they're going to know it, that's not going to happen. And then number two is I love the descriptive dashboard things. If somebody goes to a dashboard and can't see something that explains what they are looking at and how it works and some general maybe missteps that you might make when you're looking at that data, I think that you've probably created a problem for yourself that somebody's going to misinterpret a dashboard when you could easily have made it more clear what it was.
Number 3, some people learn to ride bikes on training wheels. You learn how to sell on training leads. So don't just throw your reps right into the big dog territory. Start them on the micro or the SMB sales queue so they can get at bats and get confidence closing smaller deals, and then move them up to the bigger deals. And then lastly, number 4, this is my personal favorite. It is really hard when you become a VP of sales to stay in touch with all of your reps. And you're oftentimes just like fighting off stuff with your CEO, the board, other executives. But the people on the ground level, they really, really notice when you notice or when you don't. So take your Slack messages with all of your reps and then reverse sort those conversations by last activity date. And if there's ever someone that you haven't pinged or talked to in the last 60 days, send them a message. I promise you, they will notice it a lot more than the time it takes you to send them a message. Alrighty, folks. So if you like this one, I got 2 things for you. Number 1, a while back, I wrote a newsletter on our step-by-step onboarding program that we used at PAVE. And so if you like this world of onboarding and certs, you can go get access to that in the show notes. And then number 2, as promised, Jonah did actually end up buying cold calling courses for his entire team, which I really appreciate. So I'm going to have my team put together a special code just for Jonah. It's code Jonah, Jonah, and it'll be $50 off any course that you want, whether it's the cold call course or discovery course. So go check that out. All right, folks. Peace.